Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to see you all here. My name is Elizabeth Stein. I'm the postdoctoral fellow at the UCLA YNS Nazarian Center for Israel Studies, and I lecture the political science course, special studies in international relations, diaspora politics, and I mention that specifically because I'm very happy to see many. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Yehonatan Abramson. We met for the first time at last year's International Studies Association in San Francisco, and it will be great to see you at the forthcoming ISA conference in Chicago next week. Yoni is a senior lecturer in international relations at Hebrew University of Jerusalem. His research interests include international relations theory, identity politics, and diaspora politics, and his work is published in leading journals such as American Journal of Political Science, European Journal of International Relations, International Studies Quarterly, Social Studies of Science, Political Geography, and the Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies. He's currently leading a research project to study diaspora criticism, funded by the Israel Science Foundation. It's our pleasure to welcome him to UCLA to discuss his recent work on Israeli public opinion responses to criticism of its government on the part of Israeli Jews, American Jews, and American Jewish political organizations. I'd like to thank the American Friends of Hebrew U for co-sponsoring this event and the Department of Political Science for publicizing.
Thank you very much. And so, hi, good evening. I'm jet lagged, so who knows what time it is. So, good evening, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Elizabeth, for this kind and generous introduction and for inviting me and for moderating the event. And thank you for the hospitality and sponsorship of the AFHU as well. So, I'm Yehonatan Abramson from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and today we're going to talk about naming and shaming. Naming and shaming, as some of you might know, is a very common tactic or strategy in international politics to socialize other states to behave in a normative way, in a way that is standardized by the international society or international system. It's very common in human rights. International organizations are writing reports, ranking states. Non-government organization or civil society, transnational civil society, is protesting or writing petitions in order to shame states to behave better in the context of human rights. It's very common in human rights, as I said, but also it's valid for environmental issues such as climate change, etc. Foreign governments sometimes shame countries that violate their commitments to reduce carbon emissions or other climate-related issues. So generally, we have in naming and shaming, we see, right, non-governmental organizations such as Amnesty, the UN, an international organization, and foreign leaders or foreign governments that are pointing to violators of international norms or international standards of behavior. So indeed, the common topic of naming and shaming is on human rights, and indeed, most scholarship focuses on international efforts, foreign leaders, non-governmental organizations, or international organization. But with the increasing transnationalization of global life, we have more and more actors that participate in naming and shaming. Intensification of migration processes, making diaspora communities, those who co-ethnics, co-religionists, co-nationals who left and or originated from a specific homeland, are residing abroad and participate in the politics of the country of their residence, but also in the politics of their homeland or country of origin, depends on how your terminology. So here, for example, we have Bernie Sanders in the presidential campaign a few years ago that is joining, if not now, in a protest, Jews against the occupation. So in the United States, protesting against something that happens far, something that happens in the, again, related homeland. So this is an example of diaspora communities trying to name and shame a target country. But it's not only in the Israeli case. German Turks are involved in protesting against policies of Erdogan about the Kurds in Turkey. Indians abroad are sometimes protesting against Modi's policies regarding the Muslim community in India. So we have multiple communities of diaspora that are participating in naming and shaming or criticizing the homeland or the country of origin. But it's not only diaspora. Also, domestic actors are flying abroad or sending their message abroad to international community. Here we have Natalie Portman, that's officially Israeli. She was born in Israel, but she moved in the age of 4 to the United States. She also studied for a semester at the Hebrew University. We're very proud of that. Natalie Portman sometimes criticizes Israeli policies or the Israeli government. So it's an actor that is, to a certain degree, Israeli, but she lives abroad and she resides abroad and she works abroad. We have Israeli actors fully, so people who reside and work in Israel, but sometimes are going to the UN or going to international forums to write reports about Israeli policies. This is, for example, the head of B'Tselem. B'Tselem is a human rights organization working in Israel. It's an Israeli civil society organization. And he goes here to the Security Council to talk in front of the UN. And as you see, the Israeli public opinion does not really like it that he goes abroad and talks about Israel. So what these examples show us is that naming and shaming as a strategy is a complicated phenomenon that does not involve only foreign actors, UN or Amnesty, etc. It also involves diaspora communities, citizens of the country, etc. So far, the literature focuses on foreign critics. And in this research, we try to, me and colleagues, we try to consider what happens when criticism is delivered by domestic actors, so those who reside within a country, or diasporic actors, those who are related to the place but live far away. In addition, naming and shaming in the literature, the scholarship always focuses on foreign critics directing the criticism inside. What happens when a critic goes outside to criticize? What happens to the dynamic of the criticism there? And finally, and those who are interested in methods and statistics and causal inference, so far the literature in naming and shaming is primarily observational, basically correlation between shaming and improvement of human rights in a specific country. We take here an experimental approach, which is better in terms of identifying the causality, if it's really what's driving changes. So these are the gaps in the literature that we are trying to identify. So specifically, we ask, does the same criticism, the same text, evoke different perception and evaluations among citizens of the target country when delivered by a fellow national, an Israeli, a diaspora member, an American Jewish, for example, American Jew, or a foreigner, an American that is not Jewish. So what happens if we take the same criticism and we just change who delivers it? Does it matter? And second question, does it matter where the criticism is delivered? Whether the criticism is delivered domestically in the country or when it's going outside to international audience. So what affects the strategy and the speaker of a criticism? What effect does it have on the public opinion in the criticized country? So why does it matter? Why should we care about this question? First, because in general, in the literature of naming and shaming, one pathway to lead to change, to improve human rights, to improve climate commitment, etc., one target of naming and shaming is the public opinion in the country that is targeted, that is criticized. The assumption is that the public can change its opinion and maybe pressure the government, especially in democratic context, to change policies. So one pathway that naming and shaming wants to influence is the public opinion in the country that is criticized. It matters also because backlash and defiance is also possible. In response to criticism, if public opinion hardens its position regarding human rights or regarding climate change, it means that criticism is maybe not the most effective way to achieve the result, the intended outcome. So if we see that backlash is possible, we can tailor the criticism in a way that mitigates such backlash. And finally, we know from literature in media, in public opinion in political science, we know that public opinion in general is very contextual. We have cues that help us understand messages. And because we know that, we can, from knowing that, we can infer how tailored criticism can affect public opinion. So these are the research questions. This is the setup for this specific research. What did we do? We chose one case study, Israel, and we need to justify why we chose this. So first, Israel is a very common target of naming and shaming in especially in the human rights context. It's empirically proven that Israel is on the high level of criticism from UN, from Amnesty, for civil rights, civil society organizations. It's a common target of naming and shaming, which means that if we study Israel, it has an implication to real world politics. It's not just theory in the air. Finally, second, in Israel, as I showed in the 3 slides ago, there are multiple actors involved. Jewish American communities, Israelis that are going to the UN and speaking about Israel. The, again, empirical reality of Israel is that civil society organizations and diaspora organizations are involved in naming and shaming and in delivering criticism. Here, we have some example. As I told you earlier, Natalie Portman refused to accept an award, the Genesis Award that is given to influential Jewish individuals abroad. She refused to come to the ceremony because of a certain escalation in Gaza. And the Israeli minister said Natalie Portman's decision to not to come to the Genesis Prize borders on anti-Semitism, which is a very easy trope to use whenever this minister is not happy. A second example is that there's a civil society Israeli organization called Breaking the Silence, which actually are soldiers that are reflecting on their military experience and expose sometimes things that the Israeli military did not do right or their own trauma. And in the Israeli discourse, Breaking the Silence, that's the name of the organization, the question that is always targeted is, why abroad? Yes, do that, but do this within the family, do this domestically. Why do you go and tarnish Israel's image abroad? That's the criticism that is delivered by the Israeli discourse toward this specific organization. So we see again that the empirical reality is very fruitful for this kind of research. So what we did is a survey experiment, and as I mentioned earlier, survey experiment is different than a regular survey. In survey experiment, we actually give the sample exact text, but for each group, control or treatment, we change one thing. So basically, in a survey experiment, we strive to isolate what really drives the change. So all the sample gets the same text, and we change one little thing. So we did a survey experiment. We did an experiment on a representative sample of Jewish Israeli population. And one of the common questions here, Israel has more population than not only Jewish, it's Arab population as well. But because we deal with diaspora criticism, the expectation is that Arab citizens of Israel will not have the same relations to Jewish communities abroad than Jewish Israelis. So that's why we limit the sample to Jewish Israeli population. Representative meaning that the different cleavages are represented, different demographic, men, women, Orthodox, traditional, conservative, secular, Mizrahi, Ashkenazi, right, Oriental, coming from Sephardi and association, etc. Let me know if I'm using terms that are not or something you don't understand in terms of the term. So this is the sample. What are our independent variables? The identity of the critic, who speaks, and the audience in front of whom the criticism is delivered. So here you have an overview. I hope I don't lose the camera. Here you have an overview. Let me know. Okay, good. We have an overview of the experiment. We have the same text delivered by an Israeli speaker, by a Jewish American speaker, and by an American who's not Jewish speaker. The same criticism about Israeli policies regarding Palestinians in the West Bank, This was the criticism, and the survey was done. This survey was done before October 7th, 2022. And we changed also the audience. The criticism is delivered domestically or internationally. So what is missing? If you look at this matrix, we have one arm that is missing. Can you guess what? What's missing? We have two Israeli, two Jewish American, and only one American. What is missing is American critic that is delivered the criticism in where? Domestically. Exactly. Very good. It was a test and you passed. The issue is that we tried before, did a pilot, an American that speaks domestic to an Israeli audience in Hebrew, etc. It was an unrealistic scenario. The pilot tested Israelis do not really understand this weird combination. There's an American a critic comes to Israel, speaks in Hebrew to an Israeli audience about Israeli policies. It was an unrealistic scenario. So basically, we removed it from the treatment. And finally, we have a control group that received no criticism at all. Okay, so then we can have a baseline of what is the Israeli public position about certain issues. So this was the experiment, and the second question is, what did we measure? What did we want to know? So these are our outcome variables. First, we have an outcome between those arms, those groups that received criticism. We ask them first, how do they evaluate the speaker, the critic? How knowledgeable the critic is, how well-intentioned, constructive, right? How well-intentioned the critic is. So what do the Israeli think about the speaker, the critic? Second, we ask them about their perception of the content of the criticism. Do you agree with the criticism? What emotions does it trigger in you? Do you think that criticism is constructive, is intended to help, etc.? And we also asked all the sample, so control versus treatment groups. We asked them specific question about their policies regarding human rights of the Palestinians in the West Bank. The respondents were asked to rate how Israel is faring in the issue of human rights policies, and we have specific policies. We have an index of statements about specific policies. For example, house raids or crosses, border watches, etc. All these things. So we ask specific policies, how if the respondents want to improve something or not, etc. So here, these are only outcome variables that were exposed to those who received criticism, right? It doesn't make sense to ask, what do you think about the critic of the people in the control group, because they didn't receive any criticism. Just want to make sure that it's clear. So that was the what we asked the sample. So now let's talk about what we expected to find. So first, I think you will agree with me that Israeli public opinion is most likely to respond positively, to evaluate positive the speaker, or to accept criticism when it's delivered by the most in-group speaker, which is Israeli. Right? Israelis inside, right? That's the most likely scenario. So respondents, we expected respondents to have more positive evaluation when the criticism is delivered by an Israeli speaker. That's clear. In political psychology, we know that people tend to like criticism from their in-group members. But we also hypothesized that maybe there is a layer of in-groupness and out-groupness. Maybe criticism for Israelis is highly accepted. Criticism from American non-Jews is less accepted or more rejected. But maybe criticism from a Jewish American who is maybe considered an in-between position, inside the nation, outside the state, part of the people, but not really residing in Israel. Maybe there is a little bit of an advantage of American Jews to deliver criticism because maybe they are somewhere in the middle between an Israeli and an American. So we hypothesize that respondents will report a little bit more positive evaluation when a criticism is delivered by a Jewish American compared to an American who is not Jewish. Right? So there's a layers of in-groupness and out-groupness. But we also hypothesize that Israeli society might punish American Jews for criticizing Israel. Because maybe the Israeli public opinion expects American Jewish community to be patriotic, to be loyal to Israel. And maybe the expectation is that American Jews won't criticize Israel. So we hypothesize also the possibility that respondents will report more negative evaluation when it's a diaspora member that criticizes Israel. We also have expectations about the policies of human rights themselves. We hypothesize that, based on the literature on naming and shaming, that exposure to any criticism will lead to improvement in human rights policies, or in opinion about human rights policies, because criticism that delivered in the right way can actually convince or persuade or change public opinion. So these are we hoped, or we expected theoretically that criticism will help improve public opinion about human rights. And before we begin, we asked a small sample of Israeli society, Jewish society, before the survey. We did a pre-test, trying to rate the different groups on a positive, negative feeling thermometer. So we gave before the survey, like several months before the survey, a sample of I think 100. We did a pretest. This is from the regular survey, but we did a pretest asking Israelis to locate on a feeling thermometer where do they position Israelis, Jewish Americans, Americans, and Israeli Arabs. We did that because we needed to have a basis in the beginning to even think if Israeli society identify the groups differently. Because if they don't, in general, if they don't feel closer or far, then theoretically our expectations are not relevant anyway. If the Israeli society does not differentiate between Israelis or American Jews, or between Jewish Americans and Americans, we don't have any basis for the research. As you can see, Jewish Israelis most positive, Jewish Americans second positively, Americans positive but lower than Jewish Americans, and Arab Israelis are below the zero line, below the neutral, so negative, right? So in terms of feeling, how close you feel, how positive you feel towards the groups, we really have a layered ranking of the different in-groups and out-groups in the Israeli society. So we have a continuum of relations. So this was the setup of the survey. What did we find? First of all, clearly, hypothesis, the first one, was proven corrected, is supported. Israelis have an advantage. Israeli public opinion reported more negative evaluations when the criticism was delivered by a non-Israeli, Jewish American or American, right? We pull them together compared to an Israeli. So clearly, Israelis are Israeli public opinion evaluates other Israelis who criticize Israel in a more positive way. That's clear, that's not surprising, but it's a good finding to have. We have here the official graph if you need. For those interested, I'll just tell you that the key in these graphs and articles, if you read them, to look what touches the line and doesn't touch the line, right? That's the test if it's statistically significant or not. So as you see here, criticism delivered by an Israeli to a domestic audience, and this is the middle line, and the horizontal lines are the non-Israelis. And we see here that a non-Israeli critic is evaluated as less knowledgeable, less well-intentioned, more negative feelings, less agreement with the criticism. So, and this is not significant. In front of an international audience, same dynamics, basically. So again, there is a criticism from an in-group member is better received than criticism from other non-in-group. The second finding is that Jewish American critics are perceived as more well-intentioned compared to an American critic. So there's not a lot of advantage for the criticism delivered by American Jews. The one advantage is their criticism is considered well-intentioned or from good motivation or caring about the Israel, but not criticism that is malevolent or not well-intentioned. Here we have again the findings. The Diaspora critic is perceived more well-intentioned. The middle line is the Jewish American criticism. This is the dotted line, sorry. And here we see in the we see here that Jewish Americans are located in between an Israeli critic in the blue and an American critic in the red. All the rest are not significant statistically. There might be something there that we uncovered, but we cannot report it as a finding. So the main finding here is that a criticism from American Jew is perceived more well-intentioned. And finally, we found an airing the dirty laundry effect. So basically, Israelis are responding to when an Israeli delivers the criticism towards an international audience, but only in the dimension of constructive criticism. So criticism delivered by an Israeli to an international audience is only the negative punishment is that it's considered less constructive in terms of Israeli public opinion. So here, the implication of this is that despite the rhetoric sometimes propagated by elites or politicians, Israeli public opinion does not really punish Israelis who go abroad and criticize Israel. They agree with the criticism. They think that the critics is well-intentioned, etc. The only dimension where Israelis are thinking it's not the right move is in that this criticism is not constructive, it's not helping for the situation. So again, this is what we have in the formal statistical test. Criticizing abroad is seen as less constructive. So compared, the middle line here is the Israeli critic in front of a domestic audience. Same knowledgeability, same well-intentioned. Again, it's not significant, so we cannot change anything. The only thing is that criticism abroad is less constructive. So that's that in terms of the main finding. And finally, the most important finding in terms of human rights, the positions of Israelis regarding the policies that are criticized is an exposure to criticism. Israeli public opinion reports backlash, hardens its position about specific human rights policies. And that's an important finding because it tells us that international criticism might have the opposite effect of the intention. It hardens Israeli public opinion regarding change in human rights or improving human rights. So we have here all the arms, and as you see here, again, what touches the line and what doesn't. Israeli criticism, there's no change. Right? No matter domestic or international, that it touches the line, which means not significant, there's no finding. When criticism is delivered by non-Israelis, then human rights positions are weakening, are becoming more negative. You also see, by the way, a little bit of differences in the degree of moving from the dotted line. So finally, to conclude this part of the research, we clearly find an in-group advantage, but we also find a diaspora slight advantage, a well-intentioned criticism. Regarding audience, where the criticism is delivered, audience matters only if the critic is an Israeli and only when in the dimension of if it's a constructive criticism or not. And finally, when criticism is delivered by non-Israelis, it lowers public support for improving human rights practice. That's an important implication for the naming and shaming and human rights regime in general, because it tells us something about which criticism is effective in changing Israeli public opinion. This is generally about this research, and we can talk about in the Q&A about other cases, about Turkey, for example, or India, and expectations about other cases. But I do want to update you on a new research that has not been published after October 7th. In this study, we did ask about Jewish Americans in general, a criticism from an Israeli, Jewish American, or an American in general. What we know, the Jewish American communities is not one thing, it's not monolithic. What if criticism is delivered by different political groups among the Jewish American population? So we did another research after October 7th, which also tells us about criticism in times of war, where criticism is most needed or maybe most intended to help the situation on the ground. So I'm just moving a little bit of the appendix. Here. So what did we do? We looked at common criticism after October 7th, and we found two patterns. First, we have differences in criticism based on which organization criticized. So we asked the respondent the same criticism coming from an AIPAC critic or coming from J Street. The criticism was about about settler violence in the West Bank after October 7th. So we asked the participants, we showed them the same petition, the same text, we only changed who delivers the petition, AIPAC or J Street. But we also saw that American Jewish criticism has two styles of petitions. Petitions that addresses the Biden administration back then, and petitions that call something to the Israeli government. So there are two strategies of criticism. So we also manipulated this. We gave them the Israelis the same petition, one calling the Biden administration and one calling the Netanyahu government. So here, again, it's an extension of the research, and we can have different findings. We also changed a little bit the variables. We asked about, knowledge, etc., but we also asked about Israel's international standing, how much damaging this criticism is. I will not elaborate because I'm speaking a lot. So here I'm just summarizing this experiment: critic identity manipulated, AIPAC or J Street, and petition manipulated to the Biden administration or to the Israeli government. And of course, control group, baseline, no criticism. So we can see what the opinions are. A little bit of the outcome variables. Again, evaluation of the speaker, similarly, knowledge, well intention, etc. What are the outcome of the perception of the effects of criticism? How does it change Israel standing in the world? How do Israelis think that it affects US support of Israel? And of course, positions themselves about how Israel deals with settler violence in the West Bank, and how does Israel engages in the war in Gaza in terms of, again, protecting Palestinian human rights. Theoretically, we expected backlash based on first our findings from the previous survey, but also because in times of war, criticism is expected to trigger backlash, because in times of war, the population rallies around the flag, right? There's a sense of danger, a sense of threat, especially after such a tremendous and tragic event. And traumatic criticism will not be interpreted well, even if it comes from a Jewish American population. So we expected backlash. But we also were expecting, or we were doubting ourselves, because of US importance as a strategic actor for Israel. We also thought that maybe criticism for powerful groups in American politics, such as AIPAC and J Street, we also thought that maybe Israeli participants will think, if Jewish Americans are criticizing us, it's important for Israeli strategy, etc. Maybe we'll acquiesce or we'll be persuaded by the criticism. We also expected criticism from AIPAC to be more persuasive than criticism from J Street, because generally AIPAC, and if you heard, is a more in Israeli public opinion or in Israeli image, it's a more loyal player in the Jewish American politics. Criticizing Israel is something that can be done maybe, but among within the family, in hidden doors, etc. AIPAC's position generally is to support Israel and to maintain bipartisan support in US politics. So we expected Israelis to appreciate criticism from AIPAC more because it's rare. It's not something that is very common. So we first did a pretest like the previous survey because we wanted to know if Israelis even understand the differences between J Street and AIPAC. Because if they don't, then it doesn't matter. Israelis will watch, will see, will perceive Jewish American community as one if they don't understand the differences between AIPAC and J Street. So we gave, again, a sample of 100 Jewish Israelis, 150, a battery of questions about 4 or 5 American Jewish organizations. AIPAC, J Street, If Not Now, if you heard, Jewish Voice for Peace, different organizations in the political spectrum. Happily or not happily, I don't know, depends on your position, Israelis did not identify any other organizations except for AIPAC or J Street. They couldn't locate If Not Now on a political spectrum. They couldn't locate Jewish Voice for Peace on the political spectrum. It didn't register in the Israeli public opinion. What is interesting here, you see this is the political spectrum, most right and most left. AIPAC and J Street, Israelis identify correctly on the political spectrum based on differently between the organization, but look how close they are to the middle political position. AIPAC is a little bit to the right, and J Street is a little bit to the left. So Israelis identify the differences between the group as left or right, but moderate or center left, center right. So then once this is established, that means that we can only do an experiment based on AIPAC and J Street, because if we'll give Israelis an experiment, but if not now, they will say, what, I had never heard about this organization. So what did we find? Surprisingly, criticism from J Street increased public support in improving the policies that were criticized. Israelis were more likely to express support in condemning settler violence, arresting settler violence, compared to criticism delivered by AIPAC. We can discuss several options of why this is the case, but it's relatively surprising. So you see arrest aggressors and condemn violence. This is the significant finding, and the blue triangle is J Street criticism. We found no different evaluations of the critic, more knowledgeable, less knowledgeable, more well-intentioned, less well-intentioned. Israelis evaluate AIPAC critics and J Street critic similar. And we didn't find any effects about the strategy of the petition. If it's to Biden, if it's to Netanyahu government, the style or the target of the petition doesn't really matter. The criticism was on Gaza-related policies, which might explain the result, because it's an active war. The one thing that is interesting that we did find is that only a petition that addresses the Biden administration is evaluated as damaging Israel's international standing. So the same petition delivered to Netanyahu and the same petition delivered to Biden administration, the impact is that a petition to Biden administration is damaging Israel's international standing. So it's not published yet. Now you can affect or improve the manuscript itself in the Q&A discussion. One of the issues that we should ask ourselves is why criticism from J Street is really more persuasive or more effective. We did ask specifically about individuals who were impacted by the war, and we also did not find any effect. So even individuals that were impacted by the war do not respond differently to criticism. And we didn't find backlash. There is no effect, right? We didn't find backlash. But backlash is not necessarily a good news, because it means that also the people who we did not respond, who did not were not exposed to criticism, their positions were already very hard-lined. So we didn't find any effect. It doesn't necessarily mean that the Israeli public opinion were indifferent. It just means that maybe in general, Israeli public opinion in times of war is more adamant about, or more hardline in terms of improving policies about human rights.